Without new infrastructure, Canada could export about 250,000 more oil barrels a day.
We are even more important today than we were before the weekend.
The global energy system is built on a delicate balance. Every day, millions of barrels of oil travel across oceans, pipelines, and narrow sea passages that quietly keep the modern world running. Most of the time, this massive network works without interruption. But when conflict strikes in one of its most critical locations, the consequences can spread across continents within hours. And today, the world is watching one such moment unfold. A growing regional conflict involving Iran has triggered serious concerns across global markets, particularly in the energy sector. Oil and natural gas prices have already begun rising as tensions intensify around one of the most important shipping routes on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway sits between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman and functions as a vital gateway for energy exports from the Middle East. Under normal conditions, roughly 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passes through this single corridor. Every day, dozens of massive tanker ships move through these waters, carrying energy supplies to Asia, Europe, and North America. But in recent days, that traffic has slowed dramatically. Shipping companies have started withdrawing vessels from the region as security risks increase. Insurance coverage for ships traveling through the area has become more expensive, and in some cases unavailable altogether. At the same time, military tensions in the region have made commercial navigation extremely dangerous. The result is an extraordinary situation in which one of the busiest maritime corridors in the world has suddenly become quiet. Tankers that were once moving constantly through the strait are now sitting idle across the Persian Gulf. Some are anchored near the coasts of Gulf states. Others remain scattered in open waters, waiting for instructions that may not arrive anytime soon. Each of these ships carries enormous quantities of crude oil or natural gas, and each represents energy supplies that are no longer reaching global markets. According to maritime tracking data from Lloyd's List, roughly 200 tankers became trapped in the Strait of Hormuz and surrounding waters after commercial shipping activity slowed to a near halt. Thousands of seafarers now find themselves in a dangerous and uncertain situation as they remain aboard vessels located in one of the most volatile regions in the world. One crew member working aboard a crude oil tanker described how quickly the situation changed. The vessel had been loading oil at a major industrial facility somewhere in the Gulf when distant explosions suddenly lit the night sky. At first, the crew received orders to stop loading cargo. Hours later, another message arrived instructing them to continue filling the tanker despite the uncertainty surrounding the conflict. By the time the loading process was complete, the vessel was carrying more than 1 million barrels of crude oil. Communication systems began to malfunction as satellite signals weakened and GPS services became unreliable. The crew waited through the night while military aircraft flew overhead. Today, that tanker remains stationary, holding its cargo while its crew watches events unfold around them. More than 20 seafarers remain aboard the ship, including workers from India and the Philippines. They send occasional messages to their employer and families whenever communication signals briefly return. From inside the vessel, they describe flashes of light from distant explosions and the constant sound of fighter jets passing overhead. Despite the danger surrounding them, the crew continues performing routine duties, maintaining equipment and monitoring the cargo. Food and desalinated drinking water aboard the tanker are expected to last for around 60 days. Across the region, maritime unions have begun receiving urgent messages from sailors asking whether evacuation might be possible or whether replacement crews could be sent to relieve them. The International Transport Workers Federation, which represents more than 1 million maritime workers worldwide, has confirmed that seafarers across the Gulf are now facing one of the most difficult situations in recent years. The organization has emphasized that these workers are civilians performing essential jobs that support global trade, yet they often become invisible during geopolitical crises. Reports from the region indicate that several commercial vessels have already been attacked as the conflict escalates. At least 2 seafarers have lost their lives in incidents connected to the violence. A large explosion was also reported near the coast of Kuwait earlier this week involving an oil tanker. adding further uncertainty to an already dangerous environment. Marine insurance providers have responded by dramatically increasing premiums for vessels traveling through the region. In some cases, insurers have withdrawn coverage entirely. Without insurance, commercial shipping becomes financially impossible, even for companies willing to accept the danger. These developments are now creating ripple effects across the global economy. Oil markets depend on continuous movement from production fields to refineries. When a route responsible for transporting roughly 1/5 of the world's energy supply suddenly stops functioning, prices react quickly. Energy traders, governments, and corporations are now searching urgently for alternative sources of supply. Countries that rely heavily on Middle Eastern oil are particularly vulnerable because millions of barrels remain trapped aboard ships that cannot safely leave the Gulf. In the middle of this uncertainty, attention is increasingly turning toward countries capable of supplying energy through different routes. Among those nations, Canada stands out as one of the few major producers whose export infrastructure does not rely on the Strait of Hormuz or other unstable shipping lanes in the Middle East. Canada's energy exports travel primarily through pipelines and coastal terminals located far from the current conflict zone. One important pipeline connects the oil sands of Alberta to Canada's Pacific coast, allowing crude oil to reach shipping terminals where tankers can travel westward across the Pacific toward Asian markets. Canada also possesses some of the largest oil reserves in the world. The country holds an estimated 163 billion barrels of proven crude reserves, placing it among the top 4 globally. Combined with the vast oil sands operations in Alberta, Canada's total oil output approaches 6 million barrels per day. Natural gas resources add another important dimension to Canada's energy role. A liquefied natural gas export facility on the coast of British Columbia has begun shipping LNG cargo toward Asian markets. When operating at full capacity, the terminal can support around 170 tanker shipments each year. Countries such as South Korea have already begun purchasing LNG from Canada, establishing direct energy connections that avoid the geopolitical risks associated with Middle Eastern supply routes. For many years, Canadian oil producers sold most of their crude to the United States because pipelines primarily flowed south into American refineries. Limited export options meant Canadian producers often had little negotiating power when setting prices, and Canadian crude frequently sold at a significant discount compared with global benchmarks. The current disruption in the Strait of Hormuz is beginning to change that dynamic. As global oil prices rise due to supply concerns, Canadian crude is becoming more valuable to international buyers searching for reliable energy sources. India is among the nations closely watching this shift. The country imports roughly 90% of its oil consumption and has historically relied on supplies moving through the Persian Gulf. With limited emergency reserves, Indian officials are exploring new partnerships with energy producers outside the region. Japan faces a similar challenge. As an island nation with limited domestic resources, it depends heavily on maritime energy imports to sustain its economy. European countries are also monitoring the situation as they attempt to reduce dependence on unstable energy sources. In this environment, Canada possesses a combination of resources and infrastructure that few countries can match. The nation produces oil, natural gas, liquefied natural gas, and uranium, while exporting these resources through routes that avoid many of the world's most dangerous maritime choke points. These advantages were built over years of investment in pipelines, export terminals, and energy facilities designed to reach global markets beyond North America. The ongoing crisis surrounding the Strait of Hormuz demonstrates how quickly global energy systems can be disrupted when conflict threatens critical infrastructure. For the administration of the current President of the United States, Donald Trump, the situation presents complex strategic and economic challenges as Washington monitors the evolving conflict and its impact on global markets. As tanker ships remain stranded in the Gulf and shipping companies hesitate to enter the region, the world is once again reminded that modern economies depend on fragile supply chains stretching across thousands of miles of ocean. Whether the Strait of Hormuz soon reopens or tensions continue rising, one lesson is already becoming clear. In an era of growing geopolitical uncertainty, countries with secure energy routes and diversified export infrastructure may play an increasingly important role in stabilizing global markets.